Hi guys, I'm Megan Brightwood and welcome to my channel. Or if you are a returning viewer, then hi, nice to see you again. I'm so glad that you're back. If you haven't already, certainly take a moment to hit that subscribe button and notification bell down below so that you know whenever I post a new video. I do post on Sundays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 2 p.m. Central, so there's been a lot of content going out, and if you don't want to miss anything, subscribing is going to be your best bet. So today is a how to knit video, and I am so excited about this one because I think that it would be a really fun Mother's Day project. It's this little Mommy and Minnie spa headband set, and mine is made out of a Sirdar 100% cotton yarn in the colorway Rose. So it's a 100% cotton DK yarn. Really enjoy these. I really like to use mine when I'm doing a face mask in the evening or putting on my makeup in the morning. Evie really likes to wear hers when she's brushing her teeth so that her hair doesn't get in her face. So yeah, they're not only cute, but they're also practical. So if you're interested in how to make a little set of your own, then certainly go ahead and keep on watching. And as always, I do have the written instructions over on my blog, which I will link below as well, but let's hop into how to do these. For this project, I'm going to be using size US 6 or 4mm needles, and you can use straight needles on this project. I just have a cable needle because it's easier to keep track of all my needles. And then I am also going to be using a crochet hook. This doesn't matter what size crochet hook you have. I have an H here, but it's not going to matter. It's just for the cast on. And the yarn that I'm going to be using is this Sirdar Snuggly 100% cotton yarn, and this is in the color Rose. I thought that it'd be a really fun color for my daughter and I. So I'm going to start with a provisional cast on with a crochet hook, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So a provisional cast on gives you a temporary cast on edge, and basically what that means is that if you take it apart, then you'll have live stitches on each end of your fabric. If you Kitchener them together, it creates a really nice edge, which is what we're going to be doing today. You certainly don't have to, but this is just the way I prefer, and I figured I'd show you how I do it. So the way that I like to do this is I like to grab a piece of waste yarn and start with a slip knot on one end that I put onto a crochet hook. And then I'm going to grab my needle and I'm going to take the longer part of my tail here and go underneath my needle and my crochet hook. And then I'm going to take my crochet hook and pull that yarn right through that slip knot. I'm going to do that again, so I'm going to take my longer yarn around underneath and pull my crochet hook down. And I'm going to do this until there are 15 stitches on my needle. So basically we're just kind of creating a little crocheted edge here, but it's going to be very easy to take apart when we need to. So we've got 5. We're just gonna keep going like this. So now that I have 15 stitches on my needle, I'm going to take my crochet hook and just chain a few stitches. And if you're not familiar with crocheting, this is a really easy method. So you just go around your yarn here. So just kind of bring the needle down and around and pull it through your loop. Go down and grab that yarn. And you don't have to do many, like 3 is probably enough. And I'm just going to bring that tail through to kind of lock it in place for right now. So there is my temporary cast on edge, and this will be really easy to take apart when we need to. Grabbing the main yarn now, I'm going to leave a decent amount of tail here, and I'm going to start with a knit row. This is also going to make taking apart this provisional cast on edge much easier. So I'm just going to go ahead and knit every single stitch here as my foundation. So now that my foundation row is complete, I'm basically going to start working in a broken rib pattern with a salvage edge. And the salvage edge is a very easy part of this. All I'm going to do is bring my yarn in front of my needle and slip that first stitch purlwise. And then this row is going to be the side that I rib on. So I'm going to purl that next stitch, and then I'm going to bring my working yarn through the middle of my needles here so that I can knit the next stitch. Then I'm going to bring my yarn forward and purl. And I'm going to go back and knit. And I'm going to repeat that all the way to the end of my row. And I'm going to be ending on a knit stitch. So there's my last purl and knit. Then I'm going to turn my work. And once again, I'm going to slip that first stitch purlwise. So I have my yarn in front here. I'm going to bring it to the back. And this is the broken part of my ribs. So this row, I'm going to knit all of my stitches to the end of the row. And I'm going to repeat those 2 rows until my headband measures about 18 inches. And I'm going to end on a wrong side row. So I'm going to end on the side that I was ribbing on. So on the wrong side, I'm going to slip that first stitch purlwise, and then purl 1, knit 1 across, and I'm going to follow that up with a round where I slip that first stitch purlwise and knit to the end. And I'm going to repeat those 2 rows, ending on a wrong side row until my piece measures 18 inches from my provisional cast on edge. So my headband now measures about 18 inches. So what I'm going to do is fold it in half so that the ends are together, making sure that there aren't any twists or anything. And then I'm going to grab my spare needle here, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up the right hand leg of each of these cast on stitches. And what I mean by that, if you take a look at this row of stitches here, I mean this leg. So there's the right leg and the left leg. So I'm going to go ahead and find just the right leg of each of these stitches. So I have 14 stitches on my needle, and I'm going to pick up the 15th, which is a little bit tricky because it's right here on the very end, but I want to make sure that this tail is down when I go to join these 2 ends together. And so now that I have my 15 stitches on this needle, I can go ahead and undo my provisional edge. So this is always a fun part for me because basically all I do is undo this first little section here of my crocheted loops, and then I just unzip that whole section. And it's really nice and easy. That's why I always like to do a crocheted provisional edge. It's just much easier when you get to the end there. So now I'm going to turn my work so that I have the yarn that is attached to my skein here. I'm going to cut a fairly decent tail, and then I'm going to put the end of that tail onto my tapestry needle. So I'm now going to go ahead and Kitchener the ends together, and to do that I'm going to first take my tapestry needle and slip it on the first stitch on my front needle purlwise. So I'm going back to front, and then on that first stitch of my back needle I'm going to slip my needle from front to back in a knitwise manner. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a 4-stitch repeat. So what I'm going to do is insert my tapestry needle knitwise on that first stitch on my front needle and pull that stitch right off. And then I'm going to go ahead and slip purlwise And on the back needle, I'm going to go purlwise first and slip that stitch off. And then I'm going to go in that second stitch knitwise. And I'm going to repeat those 4 stitches until there are 2 stitches remaining on my needle. So I'm going to go knitwise first and slip it off. Then purlwise, leave it there. Purlwise and slip it off. And knitwise, leave it there. Repeat, knitwise, take it off. Purlwise, leave it there. And then purlwise, slip it off. Knitwise, leave it there, and keep going until there are 2 stitches remaining on both my needles. So there will be 1 stitch here and 1 stitch here. So I have 2 stitches remaining on my needles. So now all I'm going to do is slip my needle knitwise on my front needle. And then I'm going to insert it purlwise on that back needle and take both needles out. So now all that's really left to do for the headband portion is to weave in the ends, and you could just leave it like this if you don't want to do anything else, but I am going to add a little bit of detail here as well. And so if you're interested in that, then just keep on watching. So in order to add just a little more detail, I'm essentially going to make another little headband, and I'm going to start out the same way with some waste yarn and a slip knot. And then I'm going to put this on my crochet hook. And then I'll grab my needle. And I'm going to place my needle right underneath my crochet hook so that they kind of form an X. And I'm going to take the longer part of my waste yarn and wrap it underneath both my needle and crochet hook. And then using that hook, I'm going to pull that yarn right through that little loop there. And I'm going to do this until there are 7 stitches on my needle. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And just like last time, I'm also going to chain a couple more stitches. So I'm going to bring my crochet hook underneath my yarn and pull it through that loop just a few times. And then I'm going to pull the tail all the way through to lock it in place. And now I'm going to grab my main yarn here and leave a little bit of a tail so that we can weave it in at the end. And the first row that I'm going to do is kind of a setup row or a foundation row, and I'm going to knit all of these stitches so that it's easier to take all of these provisional stitches off when I need to. So I'm going to knit across, and then the next 2 rows are essentially the exact same thing that we've been doing. So I'm going to turn my work here. And now I'm going to slip that first stitch purlwise with my yarn in front, purl the next stitch, and then knit. And I'm going to purl and knit across the row, ending on a knit stitch. Then I'm going to turn my work again, slip that first stitch purlwise, then bring my yarn through the middle of my needles so that my yarn is in the back now, so I can purl the rest of the stitches. And I'm going to repeat those 2 rows until this little piece measures 2.5 inches from the cast on edge. So one more time, I'm going to turn my work, slip that first stitch purlwise, and then go purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and knit 1. Turn my work, and then slip that first stitch purlwise and knit across. And as I said, I'm going to repeat those 2 rows until this piece measures 2.5 inches, and I'm going to end on a wrong side row. So my little piece here now measures about 2.5 inches, so I'm pretty much going to do the exact same thing that I did with my headband and grab the right hand leg of each of my stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and remember that last one is a little weird. So we're just going to grab that 7th, and then we can undo our little crochet edge here and pull that tail out. I always love doing that. It just feels so nice. So now I'm going to make sure that that 7th stitch is nice and tight, and then I'm going to Kitchener these stitches together. So I'm going to take a tail of my working yarn and put my tapestry needle on that tail. And then before we start sealing everything up, I'm actually going to go ahead and grab my headband and slip it right in the middle of this little loop here. So let's just stick that right in there. And then I'm going to work the Kitchener just the same way as with the headband. So I'm going to take my tapestry needle from back to front in a purlwise motion on that first stitch, and then on the back needle I'm going to go knitwise, and then I'm going to do that same 4-stitch repeat. So I'm going to go knitwise on that first stitch and slip it off my needle. Then I'm going to go in purlwise, move to the back, and go purlwise, and slip that stitch off. And then I'm going to go knitwise on that next stitch. Then moving back to the front, I'm going knitwise again, pulling it off, and then I'm going to go purlwise and leave it there. Then I'm going to go purlwise on the back needle, slip it off, knitwise, leave it there, and continue until there are 2 stitches remaining. When there are just 2 stitches remaining, I'm going to slide my needle knitwise on the front stitch and purlwise on the back, and then I can go ahead and take my needles out and weave in any remaining ends. And I am going to go ahead and block my headband just so that this thermal stitch can all flatten out and you can really see it in all of its glory. Then it's all finished. I'm going to make the child size version basically the same. So I'm going to start with a slip knot onto my crochet hook, and I'm going to do a provisional cast on edge. This time I'm going to cast on 11 stitches. So I'm going to take my needle in my left hand, bring my working yarn around underneath both my needle and crochet hook. Then I'm going to pull a stitch down and around and down until I have 11 stitches on my needle here. And then once I have 11 stitches, I'm basically just going to go ahead and chain a few extra stitches so that it stays in place, and then pull that yarn tail through And on the first row, I'm just going to knit all of my stitches as kind of a foundation. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So we're starting out with a wrong side row here, and I'm going to slip the first stitch purlwise. So my yarn is in front. I'm going to slip that first stitch, and then I'm going to purl 1 stitch. Then I'm going to bring my yarn in the middle of my needles so that it's in the back, and I'm going to knit the next stitch, bring my yarn forward to purl the next stitch, bring my yarn back between my needles and knit, bring it forward to purl, back to knit, forward to purl, back and forward, ending on a knit stitch. Then I'm going to turn my work back to the right side of my fabric here, and I'm going to slip that first stitch purlwise so that my yarn is in front here, and then I'm going to bring the yarn back and knit across, creating a broken rib pattern. And I'm going to repeat those last 2 rows until my headband measures about 16 inches, and I'm going to end on a wrong side row. So I'm going to end on a purl 1 K1 row. So my child-sized headband now measures about 16 inches from the cast-on edge, and I just finished a wrong side row. So if I were to continue knitting, the first row that I would do is a right side row, and I'm going to fold my headband in half here, making sure that nothing is twisted or anything. And with the other needle, what I'm going to do is go from the right to the left and pick up the right leg of each of these stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there I have 10 stitches, and the last one is kind of funky because you have to essentially go into the last leg here and hold this yarn down to kind of create that extra stitch. And now what we're going to do is go back to this crocheted provisional edge and undo this first little loop here. And once we get that tail out, essentially all we have to do is unzip the rest of those stitches. And there we go. Our provisional edge is now back on our needles, and I'm going to make sure that that tail is down, and we can Kitchener the whole headband together, making a nice neat edge. So I'm going to cut a length of yarn here. And then slip the tail of my yarn onto a tapestry needle. And then to Kitchener these stitches together, I want to hold both needles parallel, and I'm going to start with that front needle, and I'm going to go purlwise into that first stitch. So I'm putting my tapestry needle from back to front on that first stitch of the front needle, and then I'm going to slip my yarn needle knitwise on the first stitch of my back needle, making sure that the tail of that first edge is nice and tight. So I'm going to go from front to back all the way through, and that just sets everything up for Kitchener. And then the next 4 stitches I'm going to repeat to the end. So I'm going to insert my needle knitwise on that first stitch of my front needle and pull that stitch off, and then I'm going to go purlwise on that next stitch. Then I'm going to move to my back needle and insert my tapestry needle purlwise and slip it off the back needle. And then I'm going to go knitwise on the next stitch of my back needle. So once again, I'm going to go knitwise on the first stitch of my front needle, and then purlwise. And then I'm going to go purlwise on the back needle and slip it off. And then I'm going to go knitwise and repeat. When I reach my last 2 stitches, I'm going to insert my needle knitwise on that front stitch, and then I'm going to go ahead and go purlwise on that back stitch and take out both needles. And then before I go on any further, I'm going to go ahead and weave in my 2 edges here. So as you can see, I have a nice little headband, and the seam isn't that noticeable because of that provisional edge and the Kitchener stitch, but I do want to add just a little bit more detail to this little guy. So I'm going to grab my waste yarn again and put a slip knot on the edge with my crochet hook. And this time I'm going to cast on 7 stitches onto my needle. So there we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, oops, 3, 6, 7, and then I'm going to chain just a few more stitches so that everything stays nice and tight. And now I'm basically going to do the exact same thing that I did for my headband. So I'm going to start with a knit row here, just knitting all of the stitches. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Then I'm going to turn my work and slip that first stitch purlwise. And then I'm going to work purl 1, knit 1 across, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and knit 1. Follow that up by slipping that first stitch purlwise and knitting all of the stitches. And I'm going to repeat those last 2 rows until this little piece measures 2 inches. So when I turn my work here, I'm going to slip that first one purlwise, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, turn my work, slip that first stitch, and knit, and I'm going to end again on a wrong side row. I just finished with my little 2-inch piece here, and I'm essentially going to do the exact same thing that I did with the headband, and with my spare needle I'm going to grab the right hand leg of each of these stitches. So there's 1, 2, and there I've got all 7 stitches, with that one being a little weird, and I'm going to go ahead and unzip this provisional edge here. And that is why I love the crocheted edge, is that it comes apart so easily when you go ahead and undo it. So now this is going to be a little bit different. I want to make sure that my stitches are all nice and parallel, but before I go ahead and Kitchener, I'm actually going to put the headband inside. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut a tail of my yarn here. And put my tapestry needle on there just so that we don't have to worry about it later. And now I'm going to grab my headband and just slip it right in between my active stitches. So once again, I want to make sure that this tail is nice and tight. And I'm going to hold my stitches parallel and Kitchener these. So I'm going to start with slipping my first stitch purlwise. Then I'm going to go knitwise on the back stitch. Then I'm going to go knitwise on that first needle, pull it off, then purlwise on the back, and pull it off, knitwise on the next, and then I'm going to go knitwise on the front, purlwise on the next, purlwise on the back and slip it off, all the way until 2 stitches are remaining. Then on the last 2 stitches, I'm going to take my tapestry knitwise on that front needle, purlwise on the back, slip both stitches off my needles, and then I'm going to go ahead and weave in these ends. And I am going to kind of mess around with it just to make sure that everything is nice and neat. But then I am going to for sure be blocking this because that will widen out these stitches so that you can really see that thermal texture. So that is how to make this little mommy and mini spa headband set. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you did, certainly give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to see more videos. And as always, if you do have requests for other how to knit videos, certainly let me know in the comment section down below. I do love hearing your requests, and I'm working on as many of them as possible. I have to do a little bit of design work on a few, so yeah, just keep those requests coming. Anyway, I hope you guys are having an amazing day. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!